Chapter 11. You are listening at novelfull.audio. No way, this is totally impossible. What the heck did you do to me? The Archbishop of the Black Witch cult was pinned in place by his own shadow, completely paralyzed, and could only scream at Jiang Hao. He still couldn't believe what was happening, and you couldn't really blame him for that. Anyone would freak out if something this unbelievable happened out of nowhere. Looks like you're still not getting it. In that case, help him out. Jiang Hao shook his head, then glanced at the bizarre, twisted black shadow behind the Archbishop and gave a direct order. This strange, writhing mass was the special reward Jiang Hao got for chilling out for a week, a shadow monster. Shadow monsters weren't your run-of-the-mill creatures, they were super rare and unique. Unlike normal living things, they lived in the shadows and didn't need to eat. They thrived by sucking up dark energy. The shadow monster Jiang Hao got wasn't just any shadow monster, but a high-level one, already at level 10, just one step away from becoming a demon king. Compared to human warriors, the leveling system for demons and other creatures was simpler, 1 to 10, then demon king, 11 levels in total. That lined up with the 6 levels of physical mastery and the 5 levels of transcendence in human cultivation. This level 10 shadow demon was on par with the big shots in the Dharma image realm among humans. If this shadow demon leveled up to Demon King, it would be like comparing it to the powerhouses in the heavenly human realm. These days, heavenly human realm folks were pretty much the top of the food chain. And compared to human powerhouses, who were better at direct combat, weird creatures like shadow demons, lurking in the dark and able to control shadows, were way harder to defend against. For example, the Archbishop, clearly a Dharma image realm powerhouse, might be impossible to trap in the outside world, even with an army, but after getting blindsided by the shadow demon, he was completely helpless. He. Hearing Jiang Hao's order, the shadow demon cackled gleefully. Then, it took control of the Archbishop's hands and started slapping him silly. To anyone watching, it looked like the Archbishop was just wailing on himself, holding nothing back. Before long, he was sporting a pig face and looked totally dazed. Okay. Not seeing the shadow demon was about to keep going, Jiang Hao called it off. He turned to the Archbishop and asked calmly, "Ready to answer my question now?" That the Archbishop had been a somebody for years. Even though he was reeling from shock, shame, and anger, he finally faced reality. He took a deep breath, glared at Jiang Hao, and said through gritted teeth, "I never thought you were so deep. Everyone thought you were a nobody. Jiang Hao, you're as sly as a fox. You had everyone fooled. I walked right into your trap. Can't say it's unfair." That he hesitated. Even a worm will fight for its life, so he couldn't help a flicker of hope in his eyes, and asked, "If I tell you who it is, will you let me go?" Jiang Hao's eyes flickered at the question. After a moment of silence, he said nothing, and silence spoke volumes. The Archbishop had seen his ace in the hole. No way Jiang Hao would let him walk away. He was sure if he did, the Archbishop would blab to the whole world. Promises meant nothing. Soon, the news about him would be everywhere. He imagined that would make some people lose a lot of sleep in the great Zhou dynasty. He was a scholar, and some people were already uneasy about him being locked up. They were secretly teaming up with the Black Witch cult to take him out. If they knew he also had power, what would happen? If that happened, the first person after him would probably be the Empress. Jiang Hao had seen her cold side and didn't want to test it again, so, he couldn't let the Archbishop go, or he'd never have peace. Staying put in prison would be a pipe dream. I get it. I thought you'd lie, but you didn't. Seeing Jiang Hao's reaction, the light in the Archbishop's eyes faded, and he closed them. I don't bother with cheap tricks like that. Jiang Hao said seriously, mainly because he knew he couldn't fool an old fox like the Archbishop with a few words, so why waste his time? If it were a simple-minded kid, maybe he'd give it a shot. Since you're being so upfront, I can't hide it anymore. I can tell you, this man has big ambitions, wants to make things happen. You're the person he fears the most. The truth is. The Archbishop suddenly snapped his eyes open. His old eyes flashed. At the same time, a terrifying energy surged from his body. A huge, majestic Dharma image faintly appeared behind him. The power of heaven and earth swirled around him. As a Dharma image realm powerhouse, his most powerful skill was to call on the power of the universe to form the Dharma image. I underestimated you. Jiang Hao's pupils shrank, and a look of fear crossed his face. He quickly backed away, putting distance between himself and the archbishop. He didn't know what secret method the archbishop was using, but he could tell that if he finished summoning the Dharma image, his power would skyrocket. Even the shadow demon's special ability might not be enough to handle a Dharma image realm expert fighting for his life, and if a fight broke out, the commotion would attract the attention of the heavenly prison guards, no matter who won. Thinking of that, Jiang Hao didn't hesitate. Kill him. Hearing the order, the shadow demon unleashed its full power, turning the black shadow energy into a sharp blade and stabbing the archbishop in the heart. The archbishop's eyes went wide, full of despair. The energy he was gathering started to fade, and the Dharma image vanished. Finally, he could move again, but it was too late. He looked down at the wound on his chest, then up at Jiang Hao, feeling his life draining away, his hatred overwhelming. The Black Witch Church will avenge me. Jiang Hao. I'll be waiting for you down there. He barely got the words out before collapsing. A notorious Dharma image realm powerhouse died in silence in the prison. Chapter 12. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A Dharma realm expert would be a big shot out in the world, probably even calling the shots, so their sudden death is a major event. But right now, in this freezing cell, Jiang Hao watched the Black Witch cult archbishop die with eyes as calm as still water, totally unmoved. He'd seen countless Black Witch cult experts bite the dust because of him over the years. The archbishop might have been high up, but he was nothing special to Jiang Hao. Honestly, the only one in the Black Witch cult I'm even a little concerned about is their hidden pope. Back in the day, the Black Witch cult was a top-tier sect in the Great Zhou dynasty, but they backed the wrong horse in the prince's power grab, took a massive hit, and then were hunted by the government for years. They're a shadow of their former selves. Still, even a broken-down camel is bigger than a horse. The Black Witch cult still had some resources, or they wouldn't have dared to poke their heads out again, but as long as he stayed put in Sky Prison, the Black Witch cult couldn't touch him. They can't show their faces in broad daylight, so they wouldn't dare send a bunch of guys into the imperial capital. The court would smack them down hard, and sending a few assassins. With the shadow demon watching his back, that's just throwing them away. The real problem isn't the Black Witch cult, it's the puppet master pulling their strings. If Jiang Hao had to guess, the guy behind the scenes had some serious juice, otherwise, the Black Witch cult archbishop wouldn't have waltzed into Sky Prison so easily. Someone high up in the prison had to be helping him. Jiang Hao needed to figure out who this person was, and that might be the best place to start. Could it be the warden? Or one of the two deputy wardens? Maybe a chief guard. Sky Prison might be the biggest jail in the Great Zhou dynasty, but the real top dogs were a small group. Just as Jiang Hao started to mentally tick them off one by one, a different name popped into his head. Wait, there's someone even more suspicious than those guys. Justice Minister Jiang Wenan. As head of the Ministry of Justice, Jiang Wenan was Sky Prison's direct boss. He could easily pull some strings, especially since Jiang Wenan visited him earlier in the day, and then that night, the Black Witch cult archbishop showed up to try and kill him. That was way too convenient to be a coincidence. Putting two and two together, it was like the clouds parted and the sun shone through. A lot of things suddenly made sense. So, Jiang Wenan came here acting like he was recruiting me for the people in the shadows, but he was really playing both sides. If he convinced me to join, great. But if he failed, the Black Witch cult archbishop was his backup plan. No wonder Jiang Wenan looked at me so strangely before he left and told me to take care of myself. I was wondering what was up with that guy. He probably thought I was a fool who didn't know what was good for me. In his eyes, I was probably already a dead man. Thinking about it, Jiang Hao's eyes turned ice cold. He might have been planning to lay low and take it easy, but he wasn't a pushover. Now that someone was trying to off him, there was no way he'd just stand by and do nothing. But Jiang Wenan is the justice minister. He's a big shot with plenty of protection. It won't be easy to get to him, especially since I can't leave this prison. Of course, not easy didn't mean impossible. Especially after seeing the Black Witch cult archbishop's body on the floor, Jiang Hao quickly hatched a plan. he waved the shadow demon over and whispered some instructions. A moment later, the shadow demon took over the archbishop's corpse, a classic bait and switch. The Black Witch cult archbishop, who had just died, was suddenly alive again. In the dead of night, a figure slipped out of the prison. It was the shadow demon, wearing the archbishop's dead body like a suit. How did he get out? The same way the archbishop got in, someone had reserved a special exit for him. Once outside the prison, the shadow demon made a beeline for Jiang Wenan's mansion. Even though Jiang Hao and Jiang Wenan weren't exactly friends, he knew roughly where the bigwigs in the government lived. He flew across rooftops and scaled walls. About 15 minutes later, the shadow demon found Jiang Wenan's mansion. After a quick look around, he zeroed in on Jiang Wenan's private quarters, not bothering to hide. The shadow demon flew straight to the building. Who's there? Watch out! Assassin! Protect Minister Jiang! That the guards at Jiang Wenan's place were on point. They noticed the disturbance and swarmed the area from all directions, but Jiang Wenan didn't panic, especially when he saw the face under the shadow demon's hood. He understood everything. Before the guards could reach the building, he waved them off, invited the shadow demon inside, and locked the door behind them. Why are you here? What if someone sees you? Jiang Wenan snapped, clearly annoyed. He was a high-ranking government official from a good family. The Black Witch cult archbishop, on the other hand, was a wanted criminal. If word got out that they were meeting, he'd be in deep trouble. The shadow demon didn't say a word. He couldn't risk speaking. He could control the archbishop's body, but he couldn't imitate his voice. If he opened his mouth, he'd be exposed. Seeing that, Jiang Wenan assumed the other guy was just in a bad mood. Since it had already happened, he didn't bother dwelling on it and impatiently asked, "Did you take care of it? Is Jiang Hao dead?" Hearing that, the shadow demon was now 100% sure that this guy had secretly ordered the archbishop to kill his master. He wanted to rip his head off right then and there, but remembering his master's orders, the shadow demon fought down the urge and kept quiet. "Why aren't you talking?" Jiang Wenan frowned at the archbishop, confused. He'd dealt with this guy enough to know something was off. If they hadn't met so many times, he might have thought the guy was mute. Then a thought struck him, and his face paled. "You didn't screw this up, did you? Prince Yan personally ordered this. It took me forever to pull the right strings to get you in the prison. Do you know how much work I put into this? If you mess this up, Prince Yan will never forgive you." Thinking about the consequences of angering Prince Yan, Jiang Wenan looked terrified. Prince Yan? The shadow demon had no idea who Prince Yan was, but since he heard the name from Jiang Wenan, this Prince Yan was probably the real mastermind, and now he knew what his master wanted him to do. "I don't know if Prince Yan will forgive me, but I'm afraid you won't make it through the night, ha 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 ha." The shadow demon finally spoke, as an alien creature that thrived on darkness. His voice was chilling and evil. Jiang Wenan stared, stunned, but he quickly realized that the person in front of him wasn't the Black Witch cult archbishop. Without another word, he turned and ran, but no matter how fast he was no match for the shadow demon. Jiang Wenan had barely turned around when a bloody hand burst through his chest. Chapter 13. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Justice Minister Jiang Wenan was dead. He died in his own home. The news exploded across the capital the next day. Even regular folks under the emperor's nose love to gripe about what's going on, so news like this spread like wildfire. Jiang Wenan wasn't exactly a household name like Duke Jiang Hao, but he was still a well-known official, so his sudden death at home set tongues wagging. When the Empress heard, she was shocked and lost her appetite. Ever since she'd thrown Jiang Hao in prison and taken over, it felt like one crisis after another. They'd barely dug out from that blizzard, and now this? It was like she couldn't catch a break. For a second, she even wondered if she was cursed. Maybe she should have just been a figurehead, but she cut that thought short. Then, she glared at Cao Xiaobing, the Jinui commander, and snapped, "Tell me what happened. Why did Jiang Wenan just drop dead at home? Did he OD on his meds, drink himself to death, or sleep with too many women?" Sensing the Empress's dark mood, Cao Xiaobing swallowed hard and said carefully, "I wouldn't dare lie to your majesty. Minister Jiang didn't just die, he was assassinated." Assassinated? Ji Luoyao's eyebrows shot up, and her eyes turned sharp. The justice minister was assassinated in the capital, in his own house. Sure, in this world, power meant you could get away with breaking the rules. The great Zhou dynasty had plenty of martial arts experts, so fights and killings were common, even affecting officials, but there's a difference between everyday officials and someone like Jiang Wenan, a high-ranking official assassinated in his home in the capital. That was a slap in the face to the entire court. Ji Luoyao wasn't about to let that slide. Who did it? Ji Luoyao was furious. She wanted to know who was brazen enough to poke the court right in the eye. The Black Witch Cult. Word is, the Archbishop himself did it. Qiao Xiaobing reported quickly. The Black Witch Cult, again. Ji Luoyao gritted her teeth. The Black Witch Cult had used the snowstorm to grab headlines, now they were pulling this stunt. Unbelievable. Did they really think the court was powerless? But before she could blow her top, Qiao Xiaobing added, "But your Majesty, there might be more to it. That's why I held back the news." "Spit it out," that the Empress, barely keeping her anger in check, commanded coldly. Qiao Xiaobing didn't hesitate and explained. "Minister Jiang was killed late last night. I got there ASAP. He was already dead, and the killer had already escaped. But Jiang Mansion's guards got a good look at the guy during the fight. It was definitely the Black Witch Cult Archbishop. But that's where I got confused. The Black Witch Cult and Minister Jiang never had beef. Why would they assassinate him, especially with the Archbishop himself doing the dirty work? It didn't add up. So, I checked the scene and found a clue. Minister Jiang managed to leave behind some info before he died. The Archbishop must have been in a hurry and missed it." Qiao Xiaobing hesitated for a second, then took a deep breath, pulled something from his sleeve, and held it up. "This is a blood letter Minister Jiang wrote before he died. It's important. Your Majesty, please take a look." Ji Luoyao didn't reply but glanced at the female official beside her. The official understood, stepped forward, took the blood letter from Qiao Xiaobing, checked it, and handed it to Ji Luoyao. The blood letter was just a scrap of torn cloth, but there was a line of words written in blood on it. The handwriting was shaky, just 4 words, but the message was explosive. "The Prince of Yen is rebelling." Ji Luoyao's eyes widened, she shot to her feet, glaring at Qiao Xiaobing. A terrifying aura poured off her, and the pressure slammed into Qiao Xiaobing like a tidal wave. Caught off guard, Qiao Xiaobing couldn't resist. His legs buckled, and he dropped to his knees, humiliated, but Ji Luoyao ignored him, her face twisted with fury. She asked, each word dripping with ice, "Is this blood letter real?" "I swear on my life, it's the truth." Qiao Xiaobing choked out, but Qiao Xiaobing's confirmation didn't make Ji Luoyao feel any better. Her face darkened. Who was the Prince of Yen? He was one of the great Zhou dynasty's vassal kings, like the Prince of Duan. He was also her uncle, but unlike the easygoing Prince Duan, the Prince of Yen had been ambitious since he was a kid, even trying to steal the throne from his father. He'd failed, but thanks to the Queen Mother's favor, he'd become one of the most powerful vassal kings in the great Zhou dynasty. The Prince of Yen had a huge army and strong connections at court. Luckily, he'd been mostly well-behaved over the years. If this blood letter was real, the Prince of Yan's rebellion would be a disaster. Ji Luoyao was freaking out. Back in the day, Jiang Hao would have given her advice, led the charge, and solved all her problems. She just had to enjoy the victory. But now, without Jiang Hao, she had to handle it all herself. "I, Ji Luoyao, am the Empress of the great Zhou dynasty. I don't need anyone." That she took a deep breath, forced down her fear, looked at Qiao Xiaobing, and demanded, "Who else knows about this blood letter?" Qiao Xiaobing understood the situation and quickly assured her, "No one but me." "Do you think it's true?" Ji Luoyao was still reluctant to believe it. Qiao Xiaobing opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. Luckily, he didn't have to. Ji Luoyao started talking to herself. "Right, Jiang Wenan ran the justice ministry. He had nothing to do with the Black Witch Cult. The Black Witch Cult had no reason to kill him. Why would they assassinate him? It makes sense that Jiang Wenan uncovered the Prince of Yan's plot, so the Prince of Yen sent the Black Witch Cult to shut him up. The archbishop probably did it himself to be safe. Yeah, that adds up. Ji Luoyao's eyes narrowed. She didn't have hard evidence, but she didn't need it. First, the Prince of Yen had a history of ambition. Second, the Black Witch cult was evil. The two working together was like throwing gasoline on a fire, and Jiang Wen'an was a loyal servant, a hero who gave his life to protect the court. The Black Witch cult, Ji Luoyao spat out. She couldn't go after the Prince of Yen just yet, it was too big, and one wrong move could bring everything down, so, she'd take the easy route and start with the Black Witch cult. They secretly helped the eldest prince and opposed me. Now they're helping the Prince of Yen and trying to destroy everything. If that kind of scum isn't wiped out, how can the people ever be safe? Ji Luoyao snapped. Qiao Xiaobing, listen up. I order you to lead the Jinyui, the Shenbu division, and the Gongfeng Hall to wipe out the Black Witch cult. Do it fast. If you fail, you're dead. The Jinyui spied on officials and gathered intel, the Shenbu division hunted down criminals and outlaws, the Gongfeng Hall was made up of martial arts experts who dealt with other martial arts masters, they were the three biggest forces of the Great Zhou court, they'd always worked independently, now Ji Luoyao was giving Qiao Xiaobing control over all three, even if it was temporary. That was unheard of, it showed just how badly she wanted the Black Witch cult gone. Qiao Xiaobing was ecstatic. He didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Majesty. Chapter 14. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Jiang Hao woke up, the sun was already shining, despite the weird interruption in the night, he'd slept like a log and felt totally refreshed. It seemed like a night of improved blood circulation had somehow made him stronger. Ding, 8 days of lounging complete. Host receives 10 dark spirit fruits. The system delivered as promised. This whole, lying around playing dead, thing is more of an attitude than a strict requirement. Jiang Hao thought. He held up his right hand and a mysterious, ink-black fruit materialized in his palm. Unlike regular spirit fruits, this one had no sweet aroma, but pulsed with intense dark energy. Jiang Hao frowned, wondering how to use it, when a figure shot out of his shadow. It was the shadow demon, who had really pulled through the night before, like a cat. Tutuna, the shadow demon zeroed in on the dark spirit fruit. Its twisted face practically screamed, "Gimme! You want this?" The shadow demon nodded furiously. "Consider it a bonus. Keep up the good work, and there's more where that came from." Jiang Hao grinned and tossed the fruit to the demon. The shadow demon shrieked with joy, then gulped the fruit down in one bite, its face radiating bliss. Afterward, its aura was noticeably stronger. Not bad, Jiang Hao thought. The shadow demon was more helpful than he'd imagined. Promoting it to Demon King would be a major win. After all, Dharma Image Realm was on one level and the Heavenly Man Realm a step above. Still, 10 dark spirit fruits probably wouldn't be enough. Besides protecting Jiang Hao, the shadow demon was also a great source of information. Shadows were its natural habitat, making it practically invisible, the perfect spy. Through the shadow demon, Jiang Hao quickly learned about the court's reaction to Jiang Wen'an's death. First, on the Empress's orders, the Jinyui, Shenbusi, and Gongfengtang, the court's heavy hitters, launched a full-scale assault on the Black Witch cult, wiping them out before they knew what hit them. Sure, the Black Witch cult had been on the wanted list before, but the heat was low. They'd been on the run for so long that the young meat had become old meat, and frankly, they weren't the court's top priority. Besides, the court had way too many targets to watch. As long as the Black Witch cult followers kept a low profile, the court wasn't interested in a massive manhunt, but this time, it was different. Thanks to Jiang Hao's machinations, Empress Ji Luoyao hated the Black Witch cult. She issued a direct order, and the three violent organizations didn't dare slack off. The Black Witch cult didn't stand a chance. On top of that, the Archbishop was MIA, leaving the remaining forces scattered and defenseless. Their strongholds were soon falling like dominoes. Besides the easy target Black Witch cult, the Empress had her sights on the King of Yen, but the King of Yen was powerful and influential. The Empress couldn't risk open war, so she took a more subtle approach. She demanded the King of Yen send a hostage to court. She insisted on timely tribute payments. She dispatched waves of envoys and spies to gather intel. It was a multi-pronged strategy that might not achieve much, but it would definitely keep the King of Yen busy. at least he wouldn't be bothering Jiang Hao anytime soon, giving him time to develop in peace. The one thing Jiang Hao hadn't expected was the situation with Jiang Wenin. The guy was a traitor through and through, but the Empress had declared him a loyal, heroic martyr and posthumously honored him. Jiang Hao was speechless, but the guy was dead, so Jiang Hao figured, what was the point of arguing with a corpse? Life returned to normal in the sky prison. Jiang Hao settled back into his lazy routine. Hard work was out of the question. For life, he spent his days eating, sleeping, and teasing the shadow demon. Life in the sky prison might be dull, but there was no scheming, no worries. For Jiang Hao, fresh off the political roller coaster, it was perfect. And he got a daily special gift, like opening a loot box. It gave him something to look forward to. Relying on endless system rewards and the unique human emperor body, Jiang Hao made rapid progress, growing stronger by the day. Then, one day, Jiang Hao woke up from his sleep. Dong, star. A mysterious, ancient bell seemed to toll in his soul, its distant sound making him tremble. His body fell into a strange rhythm. In this mysterious state, his body began to transform again, unlike the previous transformation involving the human emperor body. This time it felt like a complete life evolution. Jiang Hao watched in awe, noticing the dramatic changes taking place. His skin became like bronze, his bones seemed forged from iron, his tendons and veins gained the strength of steel cable, the blood flowing through his veins became like liquid silver, his internal organs glowed with a golden light. Even his bone marrow turned the color of jade. Did I just complete the 6 stages of body refinement? Bronze skin, iron bones, steel tendons, silver blood, gold organs, jade marrow, So, have I reached my physical limits now? Jiang Hao was stunned, partly because he'd never experienced anything like this before, and partly because of the insane speed. Compared to powerhouses like the Archbishop of the Black Witch cult, physical strength might not seem like much. But consider how little time Jiang Hao had been training. For regular people, it would take at least a decade to complete the 6 levels of body refinement, and that's if everything went smoothly. Most people would never reach their physical limits, even after decades of trying. Even a genius like Ji Luoyao, with the human emperor body, had taken years to get to this point. If Jiang Hao remembered correctly, he'd only spent a month at it. More importantly, he hadn't even been trying. He slept until he woke up naturally. Aside from popping a few pills, he mostly relied on the body's autopilot, focusing on self-awareness. He'd been goofing off and playing dead for a month, and he'd reached his physical limits. Even Jiang Hao thought it was a little unfair. Of course, he wasn't complaining. Having reached his physical peak, the next step was breaking through to the extraordinary. Just then, the system chimed in. Ding, 1 month of lying down complete. Special reward acquired. Congratulations, host. Chapter 15. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Just 1 month. The system's notification snapped Jiang Hao to attention. It was exactly 1 month, and, like the previous 1 day and 1 week, this 1 month seemed to be a special milestone, promising a unique reward. He felt a surge of anticipation. Ding. 1 month lay-in complete. Special reward. Congratulations, host, for obtaining the longevity technique, sleeping dragon technique. Jiang Hao froze. Sleeping dragon technique? A longevity technique? Over the past month, besides elixirs, he'd also acquired a number of techniques and combat skills. As far as he knew, these were generally ranked in 4 tiers based on their value and rarity. First were the basic techniques, only good enough to get you to about the 6th level of physical conditioning. These were the easiest to find. Just walk into any martial arts dojo and, for a fee, you could learn them. No real requirements, they were the go-to for the average person. Next came the human-level skills, better in every way and offering a shot at breaking into the extraordinary realm. But they were much harder to get your hands on. They usually formed the core of some small family or organization's heritage. Unless you were direct blood, you'd have a tough time learning them. Third, you had earth-level skills, even rarer, only held by major powers. If you practiced one of these and had the talent, you were pretty much guaranteed to reach the extraordinary realm. It just came down to how long it took. Finally, there were heaven-level skills, the cream of the crop. Even in the entire Great Zhou Empire, there weren't many. Big organizations treated them like priceless family heirlooms, off-limits to anyone but their inner circle. If one of these ever got out, it would trigger a bloodbath. And longevity techniques? Jiang Hao had never even heard of them. Before he could think about it further, a flood of information poured into his mind. Unlike the martial arts and combat skill memories he'd received before, this was different. It was denser, every word carrying immense weight. The secrets and methods were mind-blowing. Even with his mental fortitude, the sheer volume of data threatened to overwhelm him. It took a while before he finally regained his bearings. It really lives up to the name longevity technique. It's leagues beyond ordinary martial arts. Jiang Hao's eyes shone. He finally understood what the words longevity technique really meant. It wasn't just a higher level than heaven level, it was a path directly leading to immortality. Right, immortality. The 6 levels of physicality, the 5 levels of transcendence, and then immortality. But in this day and age, immortality was a pipe dream. Just reaching the heaven realm among the 5 realms of transcendence made you a big shot, a legend in your own right. The immortality realm was just that, a legend, but Jiang Hao now held a manual that could actually get him there. This technique was so valuable it could drive half the world insane. If word got out, it wouldn't be long before a mob of powerhouses came barging into heavenly prison, wanting to talk about life. Jiang Hao took a deep breath, reining in his excitement. Having the human emperor body was a huge advantage, but it was more of a foundation for his future success. How high he climbed ultimately depended on him. In other words, the path he took would require some guidance, and the sleeping dragon technique was undoubtedly a clear path towards immortality. And this technique is totally different from the usual stuff. After absorbing all the knowledge, Jiang Hao understood the origin of the technique. The sleeping dragon technique had been created by the legendary Qin Tuan. The whole idea was based on hibernation. Since dragons got stronger by sleeping, why couldn't humans? So, instead of grinding through repetitive training, you just slept. While practicing, the practitioner would go into a hibernation-like state, brain on but body asleep, with the qi and blood flowing normally. You just get stronger while you slept. Basically, you practiced by sleeping. Practice while you sleep. Most people would call it a fantasy, but this method made it real. Not only could you practice in your sleep, it was more effective than regular training. After mastering this technique, all you had to do was get your beauty sleep, and your strength would skyrocket. This is practically custom-made for me. Jiang Hao was ecstatic. The human emperor body could operate on its own, but it was just a basic flow of energy. Compared to top-tier techniques with a real pedigree, it was too slow. But combining it with the sleeping dragon technique was like putting wings on a tiger. He couldn't wait to try it out. He immediately flopped back onto the bed and started sleeping. Practicing. He wasn't even tired, but after mastering the technique, he could slip into sleep without even feeling drowsy. It was like a superpower. Almost instantly, Jiang Hao's breathing became even and steady. Lying on the stone bed, he really did resemble a hibernating dragon. A special aura began to emanate from him. The shadow demons lurking in the darkness couldn't help but peek out, curious. Under the influence of this invisible energy, ambient energy began gathering spontaneously, flowing into Jiang Hao's body like swallows returning to the nest. Drawing on ambient energy was a technique reserved for the extraordinary realm. Jiang Hao was still in the physical stage, but he was already doing it. He'd already reached the peak of the physical stage. With a body honed to perfection, taking in that ambient energy was like injecting him with fuel, propelling him to try and break into a higher level. The pinnacle of the physical stage was powerful, but still ordinary. The extraordinary realm, on the other hand, was, well, extraordinary. The two were completely different. Making the leap wasn't easy. It wasn't exactly life or death, but failure would make future attempts that much harder. That's why most people didn't dare to try without being fully prepared, stocking up on elixirs and other safeguards. Only Jiang Hao, without realizing it, had launched a full-on sprint for the extraordinary realm. Chapter 16. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Beyond the 6 physical levels, you've got 5 extraordinary realms: Dragon Gate, Earthly Fiend, Heavenly Star, Law Manifestation, and Celestial Human. First up is the Dragon Gate realm. To make that leap from the physical to the Dragon Gate realm, you gotta nail 4 key steps. Step 1. Divine Consciousness Transformation. This is where your spiritual power morphs into divine consciousness. You can't even think about playing with the yuan qi of heaven and earth until you've got divine Consciousness, that's how the heavy hitters in the law manifestation realm summon the power of heaven and earth to conjure Dharma images. Divine consciousness is basically the dividing line between the extraordinary and your run-of-the-mill strong guys. Step 2, Yuan Force Gathering. Now that you've got divine consciousness, you can tap into the Yuan Qi floating around, but raw Yuan Qi isn't gonna cut it, it's too scattered to pack a real punch. You gotta refine it inside you, forge it into something denser and more powerful. Yuan Force. Step 3, Acupoint Awakening. Once you're pulling in that heaven and earth energy and forging it into Yuan Force, you gotta use it to unlock your acupoints. The more acupoints you unlock, the more juice you can store, and the harder you'll hit. This is where your training really pays off. With run-of-the-mill techniques, you can unlock up to 36 acupoints. Human-level techniques get you 54. Earth level techniques open up 72, and heaven-level techniques a cool 108. Once you've unlocked an acupoint, there's no going back. That's the foundation for any truly strong fighter. You can see how even two guys in the Dragon Gate realm can be worlds apart if they're using different techniques. Imagine someone unlocking 36 acupoints with a basic technique going up against someone with 108 from a heaven-level technique. We're talking a 3 times difference in energy potential. Step 4, Leaping the Dragon Gate. This is about linking all those acupoints together into a complete circuit. When the fists start flying, you can tap into the Yuan Force stored in every single one of them at once. That's why a fully unleashed expert is like a walking nuke. This is the make or break moment of the whole breakthrough, like a fish making that final jump up the waterfall. Land it, and you're a dragon. Normally, you take it one step at a time, but Jiang Hao's got a slightly different situation going on. First off, he's rocking a human emperor body, which means his spiritual power is already off the charts and has been transformed into divine consciousness for a while now. That's why he could see what was happening inside him earlier. Second, thanks to the sleeping dragon technique, he's already pulling in Yuan Qi from heaven and earth. And because his human emperor body is like a furnace, it's instantly refining that Yuan Qi into Yuan Force as soon as it enters him. So, he's basically skipping the first 2 steps. Even for step 4, since he integrated the human emperor body, his body is already a unified whole, and all his meridians are wide open. Once he unlocks the acupoints, connecting them should be a piece of cake. So, for him, all he really needs to focus on is that 3rd step. Talk about being born under a lucky star. Plus, the cultivation method Jiang Hao's using for his breakthrough is a top-tier longevity technique like the sleeping dragon technique. It unlocks way more acupoints than your average method. It's maxing out the potential. It includes every single acupoint, open and hidden, in the human body, a grand total of 360. Most people would sweat bullets about filling that many acupoints, but Jiang Hao, with his human emperor body, doesn't have to worry about a thing. There's no denying it. The human emperor body and the sleeping dragon technique are a match made in heaven. So, it's not that Jiang Hao's breakthrough was completely effortless, but let's just say the difficulty level was minimal. Just like that, he drifted off for a nap, and bam! Jiang Hao successfully broke through. The whole thing was as easy as kicking back with a cold one, and the instant Jiang Hao advanced to the Dragon Gate realm, the human emperor body leveled up too. As one of the world's legendary physiques, the human emperor body's got more tricks up its sleeve than just the ones we've seen so far. It's just that it needs to be developed step by step to really show off its full potential. In a way, Jiang Hao was holding it back because his own level was too low to unlock all its powers. Now that he's made it to the Dragon Gate realm, he's raised the ceiling, and the human emperor body is evolving right along with him. The spectacle begins again. His body transforms into a magnificent temple once more. Golden light blazes, mysterious runes shimmer like silver threads. The overwhelming power is even more intense than before. As all this happens, the 360 acupoints in his body undergo a massive change. Each one seems to become a self-contained dimension. Inside each acupoint, a tiny Jiang Hao sits cross-legged. They don't have their own consciousness, but they radiate authority, like a whole army of gods. The 360 acupoints are 360 gods. Even better, these god clones are automatically absorbing the vitality of heaven and earth, refining it into Yuan Force, and storing it away. It's like Jiang Hao just got 360 extra hands to help him train. Even if each clone isn't as strong as the real deal, 360 of them working together can boost his training speed to insane levels. Suddenly, Jiang Hao's body is radiating divine light. the surging Yuan force keeps amassing and solidifying. Even though he just broke through, the raw power he's displaying is on a whole other level compared to your average Dragon Gate realm expert. At the same time, the human emperor body is resonating with the world all over again. The rules of the universe themselves are flashing in the void. The imperial capital is once again blanketed by an inexplicable pressure. All sorts of weird phenomena are popping up. People in the capital realize they're watching a repeat of the show from a month ago. Everyone's just standing there with their jaws on the floor. Again. So, is this a monthly thing now, that the Empress, Ji Luoyao, is in her palace, and her eyes are bugging out of her head? Then, she gets straight up furious. This past month has been the most grueling of her entire life. All the government stuff has drained her both physically and mentally, and the whole King Yen situation has been a real headache. She's been grinding non-stop, and even with all her pride, she can't say she's made huge progress. She's just barely managed to keep the court from falling apart, and now, after all that, God's hitting her with this again. She hasn't even had time to catch her breath. Who is doing this? Who is it? Ji Luoyao's finally lost it. She slams her palm down on the table, and it shatters into splinters. The memorials on top of it instantly turn to dust. Then, she blasts into the air, turning into a streak of light and rocketing skyward. She's wearing her dragon robe and hovering in the air, her eyes locked onto the bizarre spectacle overhead. Her fists are clenched tight, and she's shaking with rage. Who's pulling the strings? Show yourself. Chapter 17. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This bizarre display of nature's power flared up suddenly and vanished just as quickly. As Jiang Hao's power stabilized, the might of the human emperor body was contained. The laws of nature, no longer in sync, allowed the strange phenomena to gradually fade away. However, the enormous impact on the capital and the unease in people's minds lingered. After all, one strange event might be an accident, but two in a row seemed more like a pattern, and both times, it happened while the Empress was in charge, making the implications all the more intriguing. Unlike the first incident, this one didn't spark a public uproar, but the undercurrent of unrest was far more treacherous. In some ways, the fallout from this was more dangerous and terrifying than before. Empress Ji Luoyao might not see all the repercussions just yet, but her sharp mind allowed her to anticipate the chain reaction triggered by the event. Back in the palace, she sat on her dragon throne, silent. She radiated a fearsome aura, keeping everyone at bay like a volcano about to erupt. The female officials and eunuchs serving her trembled, afraid of attracting attention and becoming scapegoats for her anger. After a long pause, Ji Luoyao finally raised her head, a fierce glint in her beautiful eyes. In a deep voice, she commanded. Draft an imperial decree. Summon Cao Xiaobing, commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Wu Anbang, chief constable of the Divine Police Department, Taoist master Qianji, grand priest of the Gongfeng Hall, and the director of the Imperial Observatory to the palace for an audience. The summons brought the group to the palace quickly. Cao Xiaobing, of course, was Empress Ji Luoyao's right-hand man. Wu Anbang, a burly man with a fierce aura, resembled a military general. His eyes were sharp, like an eagle, seemingly able to spot any demon. Taoist Qianji, dressed in a Taoist robe and holding a whisk, was over 100 years old but still energetic, exuding an ageless quality. The director of the Imperial Observatory, in a star-patterned robe with long, unkempt hair, possessed an aura of mystery that commanded respect. I assume you know why I've called you here, Ji Luoyao said from her throne, getting straight to the point. You are all the court's most capable officers. Tell me, what is going on? The four glanced at each other, reluctant to be the first to speak. Seeing the Empress's growing impatience, Cao Xiaobing, her loyal follower, finally stepped forward. Your Majesty, I suspect this is revenge from the Black Witch cult. The Black Witch cult is just a handful of stragglers. Could they cause something this big? Ji Luoyao replied skeptically, then turned to Wu Anbang, the chief constable of the Divine Constable Division. Your Majesty, give me time, and I'll uncover the truth. Wu Anbang vowed in a low voice. With a straightforward nature, he prioritized evidence, unwilling to jump to conclusions like Cao Xiaobing. But Ji Luoyao didn't have much time. The matter hadn't blown up yet, leaving a window for damage control. Once that window closed, the opportunity would be lost. Ji Luoyao looked toward Taoist Qianji, the chief priest of the Gongfeng Hall. Knowing there was no avoiding it, Taoist Master Qianji coughed twice, organized his thoughts, and said slowly, "Your Majesty, I believe we must take a broader perspective on this, blah blah." He rambled on, ultimately saying nothing of substance. It was all just hot air. Ji Luoyao's face darkened, a light chuckle escaped, coming from the director of the Imperial Observatory. Everyone stared at him, undaunted. The director didn't apologize, instead continuing to smile and say, "Your Majesty, asking them about this is like asking a deaf person for an opinion or expecting a blind man to find the truth. What's the point?" The others bristled at his words. Even Taoist Master Qianji, typically mild-mannered, frowned. Wu Anbang, his expression unwavering, asked directly, "Then what does the director have to say?" "This is beyond human power," the director of the Imperial Observatory stated firmly. "Ordinary people couldn't do this, and even legendary figures who have achieved immortality would struggle." "Oh." Hearing this, Ji Luoyao perked up. If it was beyond human power, perhaps it was something she couldn't control. This was promising. As expected, experts should handle expert matters. Ji Luoyao glanced at Qiao Xiaobing and the others before asking, "If it isn't human, what caused this sudden phenomenon?" "If it isn't human, it must be the work of heaven." The director of the Imperial Observatory answered seriously. Ji Luoyao frowned. Being far from superstitious, she didn't buy into talk of heaven. She snorted coldly and said, "Are you implying that, like those who follow the crowd, you think I'm ruling unjustly, and this is heaven's wrath?" She stared at the director of the Imperial Observatory, her expression menacing. If he dared nod, she'd show him what the Emperor's wrath truly looked like. Fortunately, the director wasn't foolish. He quickly shook his head and explained, "Your Majesty, you misunderstand. This has nothing to do with you. Something else triggered the laws of heaven and earth, causing such an amazing display." "You mean, a treasure has appeared?" Qiao Xiaobing, ever greedy, caught his breath and blurted out the question almost instinctively. What kind of treasure could trigger the laws of heaven and earth? If he could get his hands on it, ahem, if he could present it to the Empress, what a magnificent achievement it would be. The director of the Imperial Observatory glanced at him and said, "If it happened only once, a treasure might be the cause. But twice in such a short time suggests it's likely not a treasure, but a living being." A living being? That everyone present looked puzzled. That was absurd. What living being could trigger the laws of heaven and earth? Seeing their disbelief, the director of the Imperial Observatory smiled slightly, then turned to the Empress, saying, "If I recall correctly, when your Majesty awakened the human king body, hundreds of birds flocked to the phoenix, and auspicious signs fell from the sky." "I was young then, but, that's right," Ji Luoyao said, nodding after some thought. "You mean someone else has awakened the human king body, or a similar talent?" "No, even if someone else awakened the human king body or similar talent, the signs would only be similar to what happened to me at the beginning. And this time, the anomaly was far greater. It doesn't make any sense." Ji Luoyao said, shaking her head. The director of the Imperial Observatory said quietly, "It's unlikely the human king body or other talents would cause such a commotion, but, what if it's the legendary human emperor body?" Human emperor body, that the three words stunned everyone present. Then, they all remembered the origins of the human emperor body. Though the human king body was rare, it had appeared multiple times in history, but according to the historical records of the great Zhou dynasty, only the ancestor of the Ji family had awakened this legendary top physique. It was precisely due to this legendary human emperor body that the ancestor of the Ji family successfully established the great Zhou dynasty and achieved the great cause of a generation of human emperors. The reason why descendants of the Ji family like Ji Luoyao were able to awaken the human king body was because they inherited the bloodline of the ancestor of the Ji family. Suddenly understanding, Ji Luoyao's expression changed drastically. She stood up quickly, stared at the director of the Imperial Observatory, and asked anxiously, "You mean, someone else has awakened the human emperor body?" Chapter 18. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You're saying, someone actually triggered the human emperor physique. Ji Luoyao's eyes locked onto the director of the Imperial Observatory as she asked, each word laced with ice. she'd initially felt relieved that the world's strange happenings weren't caused by some human scheme, but it seemed she'd celebrated too soon. A human-made conspiracy would be a nuisance, but nothing more, however. If these events signaled the activation of the human emperor physique, it wasn't just a problem, it could undermine her entire reign. After all, she'd only ascended the throne as a woman thanks to Jiang Hao's behind-the-scenes support, and, crucially, because she possessed the human king physique. The human king physique practically made her royalty from birth. With no better alternative, people reluctantly accepted her as Empress of the Great Zhou, even if she was female, but now, a human emperor physique, someone more qualified to inherit the throne, had emerged. What was she supposed to do? With a souped-up version of the human emperor physique in the mix, who'd care about her watered-down human king version? If that day came, would she, the Empress, have to abdicate gracefully and hand over the reins? Ji Luoyao couldn't just sit still and let that happen. Qiao Xiaobing and the others were a little slower on the uptake, but they quickly realized the implications. They exchanged glances, then all turned to the director of the Imperial Observatory. He paused, then said, "Since the initial phenomenon, I've consulted countless records. While documentation on Emperor Taizu's human emperor physique is scarce, it's the only thing that matches the current circumstances. Frankly, I can't see any other explanation." If there were historical records to draw upon, his deduction was probably on the right track. His words plunged the hall into an eerie silence. Ji Luoyao didn't speak. No one else dared to. Finally, Ji Luoyao looked up and asked, "The one who triggered the human emperor physique, they have to be a member of the Ji clan, right?" She shook her head and gave a humorless laugh. "Silly me. How could anyone else trigger the human emperor physique?" Ha! But the others didn't dare laugh. They could see the Empress wasn't amused. She was furious. As she herself pointed out, it was almost impossible for anyone outside the Ji clan to awaken the human emperor physique, which meant the one who did awaken it was a member of the Ji clan, and therefore also qualified to inherit the throne. Legally speaking, at least, most people wouldn't object. Ji Luoyao took a deep breath, her eyes hardening. A dangerous glint flashed in their depths. "Is there any way to locate the person who triggered the human emperor physique? That if you can't fix the problem, fix the person causing it." Ji Luoyao was ruthless enough to sideline Jiang Hao, the very man who'd helped her seize power, to secure her position. How could she show mercy to someone who was threatening her throne? The human emperor physique only triggers celestial events under specific conditions. So, unless the person exposes themselves, or we check each one individually, it's difficult to identify them externally. "Then we check them all," Ji Luoyao said, brooking no argument. "Pass down my order. No one in the royal family is exempt." Without hesitation, she ordered the city sealed. Then, she sent for all the Ji clan members to be brought to the palace. She personally oversaw the inspections, watching each person being checked one by one, but the results were deeply disappointing. She didn't find the Ji clan member who had awakened the human emperor physique. Suppressing her rage, Ji Luoyao fixed a cold stare on the director of the Imperial Observatory. "How do you explain this?" The director frowned, looking genuinely puzzled. "This shouldn't be happening. How could there be no one?" Qiao Xiaobing, who was standing to one side, seemed to have a thought. He stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, while all the Ji clan members in the capital are present, there are many more in other regions." Ji Luoyao's mind clicked into gear. Right, the Ji clan extended far beyond the capital. The vassal kings, for example, were not only Ji clan members, but direct descendants. Their chances of triggering the human emperor physique were likely much higher. Turning to the director of the Imperial Observatory, her gaze was piercing. He understood. He considered carefully, then answered, "The capital is the ancestral home of the Ji clan and the seat of the Great Zhou's luck. Even if a Ji clan member awakened the human emperor physique elsewhere, their bloodline alone could still influence the luck and trigger celestial events here. Or, someone could have infiltrated the capital and secretly used the city's luck to successfully trigger the human emperor physique. That's also possible." The director paused, then stated firmly, "I can't guarantee anything else, but these two events were definitely caused by the legendary human emperor physique. I'd stake my life on it." That his solemn vow erased any remaining doubt in Ji Luoyao's mind. The human emperor physique was the cause. That meant someone had triggered it, specifically, a member of the Ji clan. Since that person wasn't in the capital, they had to be elsewhere. Eliminating all other possibilities, the princes and their descendants became the most likely suspects. Prince Yan. Ji Luoyao's thoughts drifted to Prince Yan. He had been quiet for years, but recently, he'd become restless. What had caused such a change? Could it be the human emperor physique? Had Prince Yan, or one of his descendants, triggered it, giving him thoughts he shouldn't have? The more Ji Luoyao considered it, the more likely it seemed. Prince Yan already wielded considerable military power and held a high status among the princes. The court was wary of antagonizing him. If he now possessed the human emperor physique, he would be even more dangerous, a greater threat to her throne. She felt a pang of fear, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. This position was hard-won. She had grand plans, dreams of becoming the greatest ruler in history. She couldn't allow anyone to steal that from her. Reduce the vassal states. We must reduce the vassal states, Ji Luoyao said through clenched teeth. How could she, the empress of the great Zhou dynasty, be constrained by such things, let alone threatened by others? Only by cutting off the head of the snake, could she freely pursue her goals, unhindered by anyone. Qiao Xiaobing and the others were stunned. They were warriors, not statesmen, but they understood the implications of reduce the vassal states. If handled poorly, it could plunge the world into chaos, it could even topple the dynasty, but judging by the empress's expression, this wasn't up for debate. True to form, when Ji Luoyao announced the news at court the next morning, it sent shockwaves through the entire nation, and then, the entire great Zhou dynasty was shaken to its core. Chapter 19. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reducing the feudal lords, the empress's move set off a firestorm both inside and outside the court. Even the guards in the heavenly prison were whispering about it. When Yin Yao told Jiang Hao the news, he was taken aback. Having been a ruler himself, Jiang Hao understood that the problem of feudal lords was deeply rooted in the great Zhou dynasty. The core issue was the empire's vast size. To maintain control and ensure the Ji family's power, emperors throughout history had relied on infecting feudal lords. This policy had certainly helped stabilize the dynasty, but as these lords grew stronger, they became too powerful to control. But the great Zhou dynasty had been around for ages, and it had more than a few issues. There were separatist sects and clans, aristocratic families monopolizing local areas, border troops everywhere, and rampant corruption in the court. In Jiang Hao's opinion, these problems were far more pressing than the feudal lords. He couldn't fathom why Empress Ji Luoyao would suddenly champion cutting down the vassal states now. If it was just about dealing with the king of Yan, this shouldn't be necessary. Of course, cutting down the vassal states wasn't a bad idea, but it was all about timing. If it succeeded, it would greatly strengthen centralized power and boost the monarch's prestige, offering countless benefits. But these vassal states weren't lambs for the slaughter. They might not flaunt their power, but if the court tried to uproot them, they would fight tooth and nail. If the plan failed, the consequences would be dire. At best, the court's prestige would plummet and local control would weaken significantly. At worst, the dynasty would collapse, plunging the world into chaos. In a way, cutting down the vassal states was a high-stakes gamble. As for the court's chances of winning, Jiang Hao estimated that, without outside interference, the court and the vassal kings had a 70% to 80% chance of succeeding. After all, he'd been in charge of the court for years and amassed considerable resources. However, all bets were off if Ji Luoyao interfered. Knowing her, if she insisted on micromanaging everything, the odds of winning would drop to 50% at best. But success or failure, it's none of my business. Jiang Hao remained calm, not letting it bother him. His sole focus now was seeking immortality, and his method was simple: sleeping, well, to be precise, cultivating while sleeping. Sleeping Dragon truly was a heaven-defying longevity technique. Its effects were so astounding that Jiang Hao wanted to immerse himself in it 24/7. Thanks to this amazing technique, even after breaking through the Dragon Gate realm and becoming incredibly powerful, his progress hadn't slowed down, it had accelerated. His human emperor body continued to evolve, spawning 360 clone gods. These clones helped refine heaven and earth energy. accelerating Jiang Hao's cultivation as if he were divinely assisted. Endless energy was refined into yuan power, which was then channeled into his acupoints. These acupoints were expanding rapidly, almost visibly. When all 360 acupoints reached their limit, Jiang Hao's cultivation would reach the peak of the Dragon Gate realm. Then, he could prepare to attempt breaking into the next realm, the earthly evil realm. For ordinary people, this process could take years, even under ideal conditions, but Jiang Hao estimated that, at his current pace, it would take, maybe a month. With a little luck and some helpful elixirs, it might even be less. His cultivation speed was truly enviable. Gotta work hard and achieve immortality ASAP. Jiang Hao encouraged himself, then promptly lay back down and fell asleep. Evening arrived before he knew it. Creak. The heavy cell door creaked open. An old, hobbling jailer entered, carrying a large lunch box. This was the jailer who delivered Jiang Hao's meals every day. Duke Weigua, dinner's here. The old jailer grinned, greeting him. He opened the lunch box and began taking out the food. Crash roe lion's head from Tontinglu, 3 shrimp tofu from Xiashifu, Wanji special pot, Song Air's mom's ginger duck soup, and a pot of top-shelf bamboo leaf green. All your favorites. 3 dishes and a soup, a balanced meal of meat and vegetables, plus, a big bowl of rice and a pot of wine. Not luxurious, but certainly not bad for prisoners in the heavenly prison. It was a dream come true, but for Jiang Hao, it was standard fare. After all, he was the famous Duke of Weigua. No matter how harshly they treated other prisoners, they wouldn't dare mistreat him. Even though the Empress had imprisoned him, who knew if he might rise again? Until she ordered his execution, the people in heavenly prison wouldn't dare neglect him. Old Songto, what's the occasion? Why all my favorite dishes? Jiang Hao asked, surprised. Today is indeed a special day, but I'll keep you in suspense. Eat first, and I'll explain after you're done. The old man seemed overjoyed, his face beaming with wrinkles. Jiang Hao smiled and shook his head, then looked down at the food. The fragrant aroma was irresistible. Life's too short to skip a good meal. In that case, I won't refuse. He accepted the bowl and chopsticks from the old man and began eating with gusto. Jiang Hao didn't have many hobbies, but he loved to eat. Though there were only 3 dishes and a soup, the portions were generous. He was an extraordinary powerhouse. Though he wouldn't feel hungry after absorbing the essence of heaven and earth, he had an insatiable appetite when he let loose. In no time, he devoured everything. The old man stood quietly by, not wanting to disturb him. Once Jiang Hao finished, the old man stepped forward and asked, smiling, did the Duke of Wei enjoy the meal? Yes, today's food was delicious. Jiang Hao set down his bowl and chopsticks and wiped his mouth. Then he looked at the old man and suggested, but go easy on whatever you put in it next time. It slightly affected the taste. Chapter 20. You are listening at novelfull.audio. But try not to add anything next time, okay? It messes with the flavor a bit. Jiang Hao looked up at the old man, suggesting this like he was at a diner asking for less salt. The old man's face instantly changed. His pupils went tiny, and he tensed up like a coiled spring. When Jiang Hao didn't react, he realized he'd overdone it. He stammered, at a loss for words. Finally, he spoke quietly, his voice a deliberate whisper, a little rough. You noticed? Of course. I've had this stuff a million times. I could identify it blindfolded. Jiang Hao nodded confidently. Seemed like standard gourmet stuff. Then why are you still eating it? The old man looked bewildered. Why wouldn't I? Jiang Hao asked, this is all prime stuff from those old restaurants. It's hard to come by, especially locked up like this. Who knows when I'll get another bite? Besides, you went out of your way to bring it. What, you want it to go to waste? The old man was speechless, staring at Jiang Hao's serious expression. It was like he thought throwing out good food was a cardinal sin. They were clearly on different wavelengths. He gave up trying to figure it out. Maybe you're right. Either way, the outcome's the same. Might as well die with a full stomach. He seemed to regain his nerve. He sat down cross-legged in front of Jiang Hao without waiting for a response. His back was straight, his eyes fixed ahead, no longer humble, but with a hint of arrogance. Since you're on to me, I'll drop the act. Yes, I added something to the food. It should kick in any minute now. Someone with your constitution won't even last a few breaths. You'll just, peacefully fade away. It's the most respect I can give you. That he stared at Jiang Hao, waiting to see his reaction, shock, panic, despair, but to his disappointment, Jiang Hao was totally unfazed. He was cool as a cucumber, like he'd already made peace with death and didn't care when the poison hit. Didn't you say today was special and you'd wait until I finished eating to talk? Well, I'm done. Why don't you get it off your chest while you still have time? That the old man stared hard at Jiang Hao. He didn't understand the guy's calm, but he wasn't going to argue. He needed to vent. His expression turned serious, a complex mix of joy and sorrow in his eyes. I used to think stories about swallowing bitterness and plotting revenge were just that, stories. But now, watching my old rivals off themselves without me lifting a finger. Getting to see them defeated so easily. Isn't that something? Jiang Hao's eyes flickered. He knew this wasn't the real old man. After a moment's hesitation, he guessed what was going on. This rival you're talking about, is it the Empress, Ji Luoyao? The old man froze. Seeing his reaction, Jiang Hao pressed on. So, your real name is, the third prince, Ji Xianjing. This time, the old man was completely stunned. He clearly hadn't expected Jiang Hao to figure it out from so little information. That's right, he was the third prince, Ji Xianjing, who had lost his bid for the throne to Ji Luoyao. Ji Xianjing took a deep breath and looked at Jiang Hao. So you are the Duke of Weigua. No wonder I lost. His cover blown, Ji Xianjing dropped the act. He ripped off the mask of skin on his face, revealing an ugly face covered in scars. To be honest, with a face like that, no one would ever believe that he was the third prince. Everyone remembered the third prince as handsome and refined, and this face was anything but. It was probably part of how he managed to stay alive. Jiang Hao was amazed, compared to the eldest prince, Ji Xianming, who had status but no brains, the seventh prince, Ji Xiantai, who was talented but arrogant. The third prince, Ji Xianjing, had always been his true enemy. Now it seemed he'd been right. If Ji Xianjing hadn't shown his face, Jiang Hao would have never guessed that the prince was still alive, hiding in the capital under a false name. If it wasn't for you, Duke of Weigua, supporting her from behind the scenes, how could Ji Luoyao have beaten me? The joke is, you, Duke of Weigua, put so much effort into getting her on the throne, and fixing the court. But once she was secure, you were the first one she went after, forgetting all about the past. Do you regret it now, Duke of Weigua? Ji Xianjing asked Jiang Hao, a smile on his face. Jiang Hao stayed calm, ignoring him. Regret or not, it's all the same. What's done is done. Duke of Weigua is too kind. Ji Xianjing scoffed, not hiding his sarcasm. He didn't share Jiang Hao's attitude. Even now, he was still bitter and full of hatred. But even if Ji Luoyao seizes the throne, she's just digging her own grave. Not only did she ruin things by throwing someone like you in prison, but now she's weakening the power of the vassals. I promise you, she's not going to last. Even if she wins this time, she's already lost. When that day comes, the higher she is, the further she will fall. I'll be right here in the capital, waiting for her to fall from that throne. Ji Xianjing said, his face twisted with hatred. Then he looked at Jiang Hao, his eyes cold. I can't touch her yet, so I can only kill you to get some satisfaction, so I'm the scapegoat. Jiang Hao was helpless. He thought for a moment, then said, we're in the same boat, third prince. We were both screwed over by Ji Luoyao. Why kill each other? You should focus on Ji Luoyao. I'll pretend I didn't see you. What do you say? Jiang Hao looked at Ji Xianjing, trying to be sincere. Ji Xianjing was caught off guard. It was clear he didn't expect such a suggestion, and he just stared, speechless. Then, he seemed to remember something, and frowned. Wait, that doesn't make sense. It's been more than a minute. Why aren't you dead?